Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and today let's take a look at the Mangird Tea. This is actually probably one of the most requested reviews that I've had in my comment section, and really appreciate everyone letting me know what you're interested in. So this is an IEM that's, I guess it's been out for a while, but I don't know, people seem to be pretty excited about it. Now the Mangird Tea, not a cheap IEM, but also not super expensive. It's around 300 bucks. And so for 300 bucks, you get a hybrid IEM. It's got 6 balanced armatures, a single dynamic driver, and well, that's not too different from some other IEMs in that price range. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with the Mangird Tea and comparing it with some other IEMs like the Legacy 5, the Moondrop Blessing 2, and even the Sennheiser IE300, all kind of in the same price range. And in this video, I'm gonna go ahead and start and talk about the physical aspects of this earphone, then I'll go into the sound characteristics and make some comparisons to those other IEMs. Like my other reviews, this is a live stream, so if you've got any questions about the Mangird Tea, or anything else I talk about, leave them in the live chat, and at the end of the review, I'll give it a score, and then we'll have a little back and forth Q&A conversation style. But for now, I guess, let's just go ahead and dive into the review of the Mangird Tea. And yes, it is Mangird, not Mangrid, at least that was the mistake I made. Can you see that? No, that's probably too small for you to see. But anyway, we'll start just with a quick overview of what you get inside the box, which is what you see here. The packaging itself is pretty nice, and sorry if it's a little bit big. Actually, there you go. There's your proof that it's Mangird. But yeah, the packaging a little bit large. We'll put that aside, but what you get inside of it is this. So you get, obviously, some set of tips, but actually get quite a few tips. One thing here is a little bit surprising. So you get 2 sets of foam tips, which is cool. Different sizes. You get a small and a medium. These mediums are about the same size as most larges. But you also get a trio of silicone tips here that look a lot like KZ's ear tips. They've got this sort of like puckered style at the end of it. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of KZ's ear tips, so I didn't use those. But thankfully, Mangird also includes just a completely different set of silicone tips, and these ones are the ones I use. They've got pretty good texture to them and a decently wide bore, so pretty decent tips there. You also get a little carry case. Actually, I shouldn't say a little carry case. This is on the larger side. It's got a magnetic clasp and a sort of suede-ish interior, nice and soft, with a little bungee package in here, which is cool for carrying things around. As well, you get an airline adapter with a 3.5 millimeter connection point there, as well as a 3.5 millimeter to 6.3 millimeter adapter. Now, curiously, the cable that my Mangird Tea came with is actually a 2.5 millimeter balance cable. So it looks like, and quick shout out to Linsol Audio, they're the ones that sent this to me for review. It looks like on Linsol Audio, you can buy this with your choice of termination. You can get a 2.5 millimeter if you want. I think you can get it in a 4.4 millimeter, or of course you could get it in a 3.5 millimeter if you want. Curiously, so mine came with a 2.5 millimeter, but the accessories that it comes with are still expecting a 3.5 millimeter termination. So if I were to show you, this basically doesn't work, which is a curious option. Personally, if I were buying this for myself, I'd probably just pick the 3.5 millimeter version because I don't really care too much about balanced, but if you do, I guess it's nice that you get the option. I guess we can talk a little bit more about this cable, which I think is a pretty nice cable, honestly. You know, it's slightly on the thicker side compared to some others, but you can see that it's pretty well behaved. Maybe a little bit kinky if I'm getting really picky, but honestly, this is a pretty solid cable. I think aesthetically it looks nice, and then I'll show you my Rode wrap wind, how well this thing packs away. Nice and tidy, right? You probably saw that, maybe you saw that. I've got a chin cinch on it, which is actually a very functional chin cinch. You can see it doesn't really move around, which is what you want to see. I mean, it moves around when you want it to, but it doesn't move around on its own, which means it holds its position. The cable also it doesn't seem to have any branding or anything like that. It's nice and simple and understated. Honestly, this is a cable I like. Maybe my only complaint is that the ear hooks are a little bit on the crinkly side. I don't know if you can hear this, you probably can't, but basically if you move around the ear hooks, the sort of sheathing that they use, or the shrink wrap that they use to give them their curved shape. Just crinkles a little bit. It's a little bit unpleasant, but I don't know, that's getting pretty picky. The earpieces themselves, let's go ahead and punch in on those, I think are pretty handsome. Definitely an aggressive design. You can see that the shape of it is made to pretty closely contour to the, I guess, the inside of your ear. And whether or not it works for you is going to be very highly dependent on the anatomy of your individual ear. I can say that the nozzles, I was actually worried that these would be a little bit on the long side, and maybe they're a smidge long, but I didn't have any issues with fit on the nozzle side. Although I will say that on, I believe it was my left side of my ear, again, this is where it's going to be particular because I didn't even have this issue on my right side, but on my left side of my ear, this little flange right here, this little wing, I found kind of created a pressure point and maybe wasn't the most comfortable. Let me go ahead and give you a fit demonstration. Generally, I would say it's a very, very secure fitting IEM. Isolates pretty well, and as long as you don't have the particular ear anatomy issue that I have, it's probably going to be pretty solid in your ear. You can see again, security-wise, it's nice. But just for me, I had pressure issues kind of build up right around here when wearing this thing for, let's say like an hour. The solution that I ended up kind of going to was basically just, instead of having the IEM pushed in all the way, I would just kind of let it hang out a little bit like that. I don't even know if on camera that's going to come through, but that was my strategy. I guess I could talk about, did I mention, I think these things are pretty handsome. The design on it, it's not the most understated, but I also don't think it's particularly gaudy. It's got this kind of gold flake in it, as well as, let's see which of these pieces demonstrates it the best. It's got like almost like a charcoal, like these streaks of charcoal, which I think is just kind of a neat, unique look. The charcoal streaks do remind me a little bit of the RSV, the Soft Ears RSV that I reviewed recently, and that was like a $730 IEM. So I think it's generally a pretty good look. The only thing maybe detracting from it a little bit is whether or not you like that branding. So yeah, generally pretty happy with the build of the Mangird Tea. Let me check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything in the notes. But no, I think that's going to lead us into talking about the sound of this IEM. And I'll start like I typically do by just kind of talking about the general sound signature of the Mangird Tea. And going into it, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I had seen frequency response graphs of it, and it graphs relatively flat to some other IEMs. But it does have a decent bass shelf in it, and I wasn't really sure how bassy to expect it. And I would say, honestly, this is not an especially bassy set, but it's got some pretty good kick to it. So the general tuning I would describe as kind of like a warm, flat neutral. It's got some bass emphasis to it, but not at the point that it really is going to crowd into the mid-range. And then that upper mid-range doesn't have as much forwardness as you might see in some other IEMs like the Moondrop Blessing 2, which makes, I think that kind of contributes to that more warmer, laid-back sound. And then the treble on this, honestly, is fairly polite. It's not an especially forward treble. Definitely not, I wouldn't say it was sharp. Maybe even you could say it's a little bit dull in the treble region. So what I like about the sound here on the Mangird Tea, let's go through a few things. I think the tonal balance, just to start with, is pretty solid. I like it. I typically like a neutralish sounding earphone, and this hits that. Kind of a mid-range focused tuning, and I like that here in the Mangird Tea. I mentioned that the vocals aren't, as forward as on something like the Moondrop Blessing, and to be honest, the Moondrop Blessing tuning is more to my liking, but I did not find I had no complaints, honestly, with the vocals here on the Mangird Tea. I think they're actually pretty well done. Despite being a little bit more relaxed, I didn't really have any issues with them being, crowded out by the other sounds or, not coming through clearly. And I mentioned that it is warm, but I think it's not overwhelmed by bass at all. In fact, I think the bass on this is pretty well. It's at a very good level for I think most people, right? So like the Moondrop Blessing 2, maybe we'll talk about this more in the comparison. The Blessing 2, I love the bass level in the Blessing 2, but that's at a level where I would warn people. I'd say this is a neutral bass. Don't go into it expecting bass. The Mangird Tea, I think, is just a very tasteful bump up past that. So if you want a neutral sounding IEM, but you don't really want to give up on bass, the Mangird Tea is actually at a pretty nice level. And the bass that's here, I think, is pretty solid. It's got a nice punch and nice body to it. It's maybe not standout bass like something on like the FiO FH3, but I think for what it is, it's actually pretty well done. And then the treble, I mentioned the treble is a little bit on the dull side, and a side effect of that is that, well, one, if you're allergic to sharp treble, I don't think you're going to have an issue here with the Mangird Tea. And then further, nice effect of that is that things like sibilance really are not an issue here on the Mangird Tea. Now, the things that maybe I don't love so much about the sound on the Mangird Tea, and I'm going to be picky about anything I listen to. Well, honestly, that treble presentation I talked about, it's a little bit too soft for my liking. It keeps the sound, it's a little bit maybe smoothed over. I think it's inoffensive, of course, but it does prevent the earphone from having some of that bite to it in the top end. Now, again, if you're a little bit allergic to that top end bite, I think that can be actually a good thing for you. But for me, it left me wanting a bit. I think also the mid-range tuning, how flat the mid-range is, it could use a little bit of extra contrast, Again, this is me, I get to be picky about these things. Generally it sounds pretty natural, but there is maybe a slight bit of what people might refer to as honkiness, where if I take these things and EQ down the 1000 hertz, if I put an EQ at 1000 hertz and drop it down by a couple of decibels, doesn't need to be a lot, but just a little bit, that creates more contrast between the upper mid-range and the lower mid-range, and I think kind of resolves that slight honkiness that I had. Whereas here, as it is, it's just there is a bit of a lack of contrast in that mid-range, not too unlike the Legacy 5 that I reviewed recently. But again, that's where if I'm being picky, I would bring that up. And that general lack of contrast, I think the bass gives the Mangird Tea a pretty nice sense of depth to it, but that lack of contrast through the mid-range, and I think especially in the treble, does prevent this from sounding, to my ear, very dynamic. Like it's a little bit on the flat sounding side, a little bit two-dimensional, especially with busy tracks. With simpler tracks, I don't find it to be as much of an issue, but with busier tracks, let's say like, even just like a fairly simple rock album like Gish by Smashing Pumpkins, I do find that it can come across a little bit two-dimensional. So I think that's kind of like my general feelings on the sound here of the Mangird Tea. Let's go ahead and bring in a couple of other IEMs for comparison. So I did recently review this. This is the Thea Audio Legacy 5, which I swear to you is not pure black. It just kind of looks that way on camera. But this was an earphone I reviewed, I guess, just 2 days ago. And I was kind of listening to these things side by side during the evaluation. Off the bat, like fit-wise, I prefer the Legacy 5. I don't know if that's what you care about at this point in the review, because that's a very personal thing, but fit-wise, these things were pretty good for me. Again, these are a little bit uncomfortable, especially on the left side of my head. I think in terms of tuning, however, they're both kind of similarly flat through the mid-range, but I do find that vocals are a little bit more forward here on the Mangird Tea, which is to my liking. But I did find that the treble on the Tea was not quite as spicy or present as it is here on the Legacy 5. The Legacy 5 can have a tendency to come across just slightly on the bright side, which for me is a good thing. I find that pretty appealing here in the Legacy 5, whereas here on the Mangird Tea, I found it a little bit dull in that treble region. Now, the bass I do think is fuller here. Again, one of the complaints I had on the Legacy 5 was that the bass maybe a little bit too lean. I don't have that issue here on the Mangird Tea. I think it's still, fairly well isolated in the sub bass, and it doesn't have the issue of clouding up the mid-range, but it does give you a stronger punch here with the Mangird than you're going to get on the Legacy. Maybe not necessarily a deeper rumble. They're both pretty good in the sub bass region, but in that mid bass, where you're going to get a little bit more of that sort of like physicality to it, I think the Mangird Tea is a tad better. But honestly, between these two, if I think you know, if you're looking for a neutralish sound, both of these are pretty decent options. And it's really going to come down to what's more important to you. A little bit of extra detail and resolution in the mid-range and the treble, which is what I think you get here with the Legacy 5. Or do you want something that's maybe more relaxed in the treble with a stronger sense of bass? And I think that's what you get here with the Mangird Tea. My personal preference would be honestly for the Legacy 5, but it's, you know, I think it's very much a personal thing. I think if you put these things, had 10 people listen to these things back to back, you'd probably get 50-50 choice between, you know, people choosing one over the other. The other IEM, or a couple other IEMs I wanted to compare to, so this is the Sennheiser IE300, and this one's pretty different. So both the Legacy and the Mangird Tea are hybrids. The Sennheiser here is just a single dynamic driver earphone. But I bring this one in for a couple of reasons. One, because price is actually exactly the same. This is a $300 IEM versus $300 with the Mangird Tea. But also just as kind of an example of how you can take that bass preference. This, I said, was a little bassier than the Legacy 5. This is that bass preference taken to a whole different level. If you want a lot of bass, here you go. So the tuning is very, very different here on the Sennheiser IE300. My personal preference for tuning, honestly, I think the Mangird Tea is tuned much better to my preference. It's much more neutral, vocals, mid-range, and stuff like that comes across quite well. Whereas here on the Sennheisers, the mid-range is, I mean, it's there, but this is very much an IEM that's all about the bass and the kind of mid-treble to even like treble air regions. So I do think that this thing maybe sounds a little bit bigger and stages a little bit bigger here in the Sennheiser, and maybe is a little bit more engaging because of that bass and treble emphasis. I think stronger on the V tuning, whereas this is definitely a more relaxed tuning, and it's kind of like, this is like the neutral fans compromise to something like the Sennheiser IE300. I do think the Sennheiser is maybe more committed to what it's trying to do, whereas, you know, this is a bit of a compromise, and this is kind of just like, I want to be bassy, I want to be V, I'm going to go that full direction. And then there's also going to be some differences in terms of timbre, this being mostly handled by balanced armatures, this being all one single dynamic driver. I find that mid-range on this, even though it's just kind of like in the background, mid-range and treble come across a little bit more detailed and textured here on the Sennheiser, whereas they're maybe a little bit flat. And again, two-dimensional here on the Mangird. So between these two, my preference, honestly, just purely on sound, would probably be the Mangird Tea. Although again, this is a little bit more of a niche, and I might find myself reaching for this more often just because it does a thing fairly well. It's just, this is, again, that kind of like halfway compromise, or maybe even like a quarter-way compromise. But that's gonna bring me to my final comparison, and I don't actually have notes on this one because I wasn't really gonna make this comparison because I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this one, but this is the Moondrop Blessing 2. It's around $320, so a little bit more expensive than the Mangird Tea, but I think in the same ballpark. This is also a hybrid IEM, so I believe it's 4 balanced armatures with a single dynamic driver. So you get more drivers here, but this one still costs a little bit more, and honestly, in my opinion, it's worth it. The Blessing 2 is still just like a standout in this price range. Resolution through the mid-range especially. Mid-range on this thing is so good. Maybe there's a little bit of treble spiciness in here that can get a little bit harsh, whereas again, I think the Mangird Tea's treble never really, it's pretty inoffensive. Maybe a little bit boring for me again, but if you've heard the Blessing 2 and maybe it was a little bit too bright or maybe a little bit harsh in the treble and that was an issue for you, Mangird Tea might be an option. I think vocals come through more clearly and more forward here on the Blessing 2. That's going to be read out on a frequency response graph, but also just I think in listening, that resolution through the mid-range is phenomenal here on the Blessing 2, whereas here I find that mid-range resolution is not the strong suit of the Mangird Tea. Bass quality, honestly, there's a little bit more bass here, a little bit more bass quantity on the Mangird Tea, Quality, I might actually give a slight advantage to the Blessing 2, although they're probably around in the same ballpark. It's just the Blessing 2 seems to dig a little bit deeper. It just kind of like, it's more on the rumble side, and even the hits are pretty good too. But if you're looking for a stronger mid-bass hit, you'll probably get that here with the Tea. So I think that's gonna go ahead and wrap up my review of the Mangird Tea. I think I've said everything I wanted to. So just generally, I think it's a pretty nice IEM, and I'm gonna go ahead and give it a very solid 3 stars. And that might seem like it deserves better than that. And honestly, I have a hard time finding much that I don't. It's hard to pick on this IEM because it's kind of just middle of the road. Again, like if you're looking for something that's neutral-ish, but you don't want to give up on that bass presence, I think the Mangird Tea is a pretty good option. But I also think the Thea Audio Legacy 5 is a pretty good option, and I like that better. Not that I'm trying to use my star rankings to or my star scores to necessarily rank IEMs. There's not that many stars to choose from, but just, yeah, I kind of found this to be a pretty solid IEM, but just not really that engaging for my preferences. So that is the Mangird Tea. If you're interested in checking this thing out, I do have a link in the description down below. And again, shout out to Linsoul Audio for sending this in for review. While you're down there, if you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit the like button. It helps me out, helps other people find the channel. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ding the YouTube bell. And I guess I'll see you in the next super review. Have a good week. All right, live chat. Let me roadie wrap this IEM. Look at that beautiful roadie wrap. And catch up with what's going on in the stream. How we doing? It's Wednesday. I'm gonna call it afternoon. Chick Tomas, how's it going? Captain Cake, AKA Valsuki, nice to see you. Glad you could stay up late. I know you're in the UK. Oh, Chick Tomas, it's even later where you're at. Wow. Sai, how's it going? Welcome. Good to see you again. Demetriel Alvarez, how's it going? Welcome. Jeffrey Fernandez, hello, hello. Sammy Anderson saying, a great pair of IEMs, 300 bucks well spent. I take it you've heard the Mangird Tea. I'd be really interested to hear what are your impressions and what did you balance it against when you were making the purchase decision for the Mangird Tea, and why did you choose the Mangird Tea, and did it pay off? It sounds like you're pretty happy with it. Bogdan Florea saying, spoiler alert, they are absolutely amazing. So same question to you. For anyone here who already has the Mangird Tea, a lot of people were asking about it, so I think there's definitely a lot of interest in this IEM. What are the other reasons maybe that I missed or that I didn't talk about that you love this earphone? Let me know. When I get to that point in the live chat, I'll read it out. Homestay asking, have I heard of the Kiwi Orchestra? I think, is that the new, it's like an 8-balanced armature set that's out? I've heard of it, but I have not heard it, nor have I touched it. Sammy Anderson is suggesting, so Sammy, one of the people that has the Mangird Tea, suggesting that you need foam tips. I didn't use foam tips, full disclosure. Typically my expectation with foam tips, and I don't use them very often because mostly just they wear out over time, and I don't like consumables, whereas silicone tips seem to kind of last forever as long as you clean them. But anyway, the last time that I really spent much time with silicone tips tends to take a little bit of edge off of treble, which I don't think this necessarily needs for my taste, but I don't know. I didn't actually try it, so that might not be the effect that you get with it. So Sam, you're saying the bass is pretty good with foam tips. Maybe I'll try that out. Omar saying the Sennheisers, the mid-range is, yeah, it's The Sennheisers are not a mid-range focus IEM. They are just kind of incredibly about the bass. I guess it's unapologetic, and if you're looking for a bassy IEM, that's an option. I reviewed those maybe even 2 months ago. I gave them 3 stars. I think that's about right. Like, it's a very good fitting IEM. For that reason alone, I've got some pretty good reason to use it. And I was using that last night to listen to the Roots. The Roots actually sound pretty good on the Sennheisers, but then I went to something like Smashing Pumpkins, and it did not sound that great on the Sennheisers. Size asking, are Sennheisers more comfortable? Which one is best for bass-heavy songs? So I do find the Sennheisers to be more comfortable. They're super small. They disappear into my ears, and very secure fitting IEM, honestly. Whereas the Mangird Tea, again, like on my right side, it was pretty good fit, pretty good comfort. Didn't have any issues. On my left side, I had to get a pressure point over time. For bass-heavy songs, it's going to really depend on more than just the bass in the track, to be honest. Like the Roots I was talking about, sounding really good in the Roots. The Roots don't have, at least the album I was listening to, which I believe, what is the name of it? Do you need more? Do you want more? The album doesn't have a lot of mid bass in it, but it's got these really nice, deep low bass hits. And those sounded really good on the Sennheiser, whereas I can't imagine, I don't have any examples on the top of my head because I wasn't listening with the Sennheisers with other things, but I can imagine that an overabundance of mid bass, it depends on what you want out of the rest of the music. If all you want is that bass, the bass is pretty good on the Sennheisers, honestly. It's not like I did not like the bass on the Campfire Dorado. I think the bass in the Sennheisers is at a similar level, but I think it is better done, better controlled. That said, it's still gonna crowd out the rest of the frequency response. So if you've got strong vocals, they might get masked out quite a bit by the bass, depending on, again, if it's a heavily mid-bassy track, it might come at the expense of the vocals in that track. If you're listening to like EDM or something like that, that could work. Looks like some folks called the 3 stars. I like seeing the speculation in the middle of the review. Bogdan with the disagreement. They're a solid 5 in your book. I think that's perfectly fine. Do not let my opinion, don't let that make you feel any worse about the product that you have and you love. There's a lot of things that I love that other people review and they don't give it as good as scores, and sometimes I'm like, am I wrong? But then you just got to remember, this is not a right and a wrong hobby. This is just find the thing that you like. And a lot of the times when I'm reviewing things, like I try to say more than just I liked it or I didn't like it, right? But a lot of the times, sometimes it's just the words apart from I liked it or I didn't like it are just kind of justification, because sometimes I'll like something that does things similarly to a different piece or different IEM that I didn't like. And I can say why I like this one and maybe try and differentiate it, but a lot of the times, I don't know, let's say like this IEM is too bassy, and then I'll hear another bassy IEM and I'm like, oh, but that's actually pretty good. I was just complaining about that one being too bassy. What's the deal? And there's just more to it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a very subjective hobby. We're gonna disagree on some things, and that's fine. Chet Sandberg, you have this, one of your faves. Cool, what are your other faves? Curious to know. Because I think that would actually be pretty informative for people who love the Mangird Tea. What are other IEMs that you've heard that you love, maybe similarly, maybe not quite as much, but what are some other IEMs that you love? And that'll give people a frame of reference. Night Quaker, how's it going? Nice to see you. Hussein in Turkey, how's it going? I was in Turkey once, I guess about 10 years ago, wow. In Kushadesi. Sai's asking about the File FH5S or the Sennheiser IE300. I haven't heard the FH5S yet. I do think it's on the way though. Daniel Rosenblum, another happy Mangird Tea customer. Wow. Michael Finnerty, hello from the UK. How's it going? Zion Guy, I like the Thea Audio Legacy 5s. I do too. Don Vittorio, wow, 6 a.m. in the Philippines. Are you up early or are you up late? I wake up around 6 a.m. But then I just sit in bed and I'm kind of useless for about an hour. Carlos Silva asking these or the ER2XR tuning and technicalities. I think that's actually a pretty interesting question. So my preference, I'll just say straight up off the bat, is going to be the Etymotic ER2XR. I think the tuning on the Etymotic ER2XR, it's stronger in the upper mid-range, a little bit more forward in the vocals. Treble tuning on them, I would say is generally smoother on the Etymotic, but not necessarily any more like forward or detailed. Technicalities, I think, just again, generally, I don't know. That's actually kind of a hard pick because the Etymotic ER2XR is an earphone I like quite a bit, but it's not really known for just, you know, outstanding resolution through the mid-range and the treble. It's a little bit on the two-dimensional side. Not the biggest staging or like strongest imaging, but I would just say generally I prefer listening to the ER2XR. Again, this is where it's going to be me getting to words that might try and justify why I like it, but it's primarily going to be the tuning, the smoothness, and the bass quantity on the ER2XR is probably a little bit closer to my preferences, especially if you. So the Etymotic ER2XR and Etymotic in general, they sell these filtered tuning kits. They're these little itty bitty, like look like grains of rice filters that can go into the nozzles of their earphones. The stock filter in the ER2XR, and I think in everything that Etymotic sells, is the green one. But if you swap the ER2XR with the brown filters are pretty special. Actually, I think it makes the technicalities a little bit stronger, which I think it's just all frequency response and perception of it, but I think it's real. Sai, you just woke up and you're making coffee while you watch. Cool. How do you like your coffee? I used to drink my coffee entirely just straight black for many, many years. And then started just a little dab of cream, just a little boop. And I think I like that better. Unless it's a really good coffee. A really good coffee can be pretty special straight black, but also pretty special with a dab of cream. Theodore Zurla saying, I couldn't decide between the Mangird Tea and the Legacy, so I went with the Legacy, or the Legend 4. I assume you're saying the Legacy 4 to save some money. Yeah, the Legacy 4, also an IEM I just reviewed a couple of days ago. That's about $100 cheaper than the Mangird Tea, and I would say technicalities-wise, they're probably about in the same par. Tuning-wise, they're different. I think the Legacy 4 is probably stronger on clarity. It's a little bit more of a traditional V-shape, but like a nice, polite V-shape. Whereas the Mangird's a little bit more neutral, a little bit more mid-range focused. So tuning-wise, I'd probably actually go with the Mangird. But yeah, they're pretty close. They're pretty close. Matteo Lembo Luscari. That's a very musical sounding name. What do you think about the Blessing 2 Dusk versus the JVC FDX1 in terms of timbre and naturalness? I really want to buy the Dusk, but I'm concerned about the timbre. I mean, if you've heard balanced armatures before, I don't think you'll be shocked by the timbre on the Blessing 2. I think And to be honest, like I think the FDX one has its own issues with timbre, but they're just not related to it being balanced armatures. I think the FDX one, the JVCs, are a little bit brighter and kind of more forward and leaner in the lower mid-range and the bass. And I think that the tuning on, like if I'm getting really picky about the tuning on the upper mid-range on the FDX one, it peaks at around 4K rather than where I think it probably should peak, probably around like 2.5K. And that has, at least I assume that's what's having this effect on the timbre of the earphone. Some people refer to it as a little bit metallic, and I can see what people are talking about. It's to me maybe less about a metallicness though, and it's just more on the vocals. I think it kind of can give vocals a little bit too much of a breathy, edginess to them. So to my ears, like tonally, I think the Blessing 2 is stronger. You did ask about the Dusk specifically, so there's going to be another big difference there in that the Dusk is going to have a lot more sub bass than the FDX one. So I think that's probably going to be the bigger difference, honestly. If you're weighing the Dusk versus the FDX one, timbre, I don't think it's going to be a major thing. I mean, it's going to be different, but I don't think you would pick up the Blessing 2 and be like, wow, I really wish I had that timbre of the FDX one. I think more you're going to pick up the FDX one and either say this is the right amount of bass, which is basically neutral, with a nice, like it's got a nice body to it, but it's basically neutral bass, or you're going to want to say, I wish I had about 6 decibels more of sub bass, which is what the Dusk is. Home State, sorry, I was reading your thing and then YouTube skipped ahead. Home State saying, so far I'm leaning more toward the sound on the FH3 over the EST112 with regard to the treble. Interesting. I would say my thoughts on the treble. So the EST112, obviously in the name, EST, electrostatic, it's handling the high frequencies. I think tuning wise, they're, and just specifically in the treble region, I think just pure tuning wise, maybe I would prefer the tuning on the FH3 in the treble region, I guess. But the treble character on the 112 I think is quite a bit stronger. Like the treble on the FH3, it's a $130 earphone, so I wasn't too picky about it there, but it can be a little bit on the gritty side maybe. Whereas on the EST112, it's got that EST driver, which apparently some people don't love the character of EST treble, but having now heard a few different IEMs with EST treble, I think I actually like it. My impression of what EST treble is I'm going to contrast it versus balanced armatures. Balanced armatures can kind of come across a little bit digital in the treble, which gives them a really nice sense of detail. And really good definition, but maybe just a little bit kind of like unnatural and plasticky in a different way than people typically refer to BA timbre, but like, yeah, a little bit clicky, I don't know. Whereas the EST treble, I find maybe a little bit less strong on detail, although definition is still pretty good. It seems to me that like kind of like the attack on treble with EST drivers is a little bit more rounded, which I find actually makes it kind of sound pleasant, maybe a little bit more organic sounding than balanced armature treble at the expense of detail. So I think I like the EST treble, or at least I like it for what it is. Do I like it better than balanced armatures? I don't know, kind of really depends on the implementation, but I think in that particular comparison, FH3 versus the 112, I would pick the overall treble character of the 112. Chick asking about the Sennheiser. Yeah, Sennheiser, the company sent me the IE300. In fact, and I mentioned this in my review, the first unit that I got, the right earpiece actually just kind of spontaneously died. It stopped working. It wasn't just the cable, because I swapped out sides and it was still the right earpiece that was dead. I mentioned it in my review and kind of in passing, because it seemed like I don't know, it seemed like the sort of thing that can happen to any earphone, and then you get it replaced from the manufacturer, and Sennheiser did replace it. And I didn't have any issues and still haven't had any issues with the replacement. But there have been a couple other people who've reached out to me and let me know that they've had a very similar experience where one of the drivers on their IE300 just kind of spontaneously dies, which is an interesting thing. This is going to be an earphone they'll sell for years probably, so I'm sure whatever it is, they'll figure it out. I sent back my broken one to Sennheiser so that they could take a look and find out what the issue was. But maybe a thing to keep an eye out for is, if you're in the market for an IE300, buy it from somewhere where you're not going to have any issues getting it replaced. Because you might have to within the first year. If you get it replaced, if you don't have to replace it for the first year, you'll probably be fine. And if you do get it replaced within the first year, it'll probably be fine because Sennheiser will have solved it. Omstay asking, am I doing the Starshine? So there is, I think the Starshine is on its way. I'm trying to remember. At this point, I've forgotten everything that's inbound. But I've got a couple of packages at my mailbox I'm going to go to in a little bit. Maybe the Starshine is in there. Say you with an interesting question. Would you say that the Teas are a solid pick over the Blessing 2 if you're uncertain of the fit on the Blessing 2? So the Blessing 2 is kind of notoriously known as a large fitting IEM. In fact, if we go to the table here, I can probably demonstrate that a little bit. Let's pop this off and we'll pop this one off for comparison. So probably you can tell in the pictures that the Blessing 2 is just generally a chunkier IEM, especially here in the stem. Just look at how stubby and girthy that stem is versus, the relatively normal stem girth here on the Mangird Tea. Yeah, this definitely fits bigger. Although if I'm perfectly honest, in my ears, I find the Blessing 2 probably at least as comfortable, and I don't have that comfort issue in the left, so it's really a personal thing. I don't think I would recommend the Mangird Tea to somebody over the Blessing 2 just because they're concerned about the fit. If they've tried the Blessing 2 and they know it doesn't fit, then yes, I would consider something like the Mangird Tea. But if you haven't tried either, I would say they're both kind of in the same ballpark of it's gonna work for you or it might not, but it's probably gonna be fine. Rob Hawk, how's it going? Val Dion, you're listening to your Mangird Teas right now. Wow, look at that. What a popular earphone. Matteo Brigante saying, I see from the graph that the Mangird Tea has a dip around 5K. How does that translate into listening? So I think that, some of this is just kind of like speculative. I've never tuned an IEM myself, so I've played around with EQ and stuff like that, but this is still going to be a little bit speculative. My hypothesis is that a dip at around 5K is actually good for sound. I find the IEMs that don't have a dip at 5K, that have kind of like, a consistent 5K to 6K presence, it can add maybe a little bit of extra presence and forwardness on vocals, give a little bit of edginess to sort of the top end of vocals, especially higher pitch vocals. I find that it can sometimes elevate or exacerbate sibilance, which is generally baked into the recording, but some earphones do better with it than others. And I find that having that 5K cut does a pretty good job of removing any harshness in that vocal, again, that vocal edginess, and can even seem to improve performance with sibilance. And again, with the Mangird Tea, I actually found it did pretty well with sibilant tracks. A good example, if you want to test sibilance, Church's song Graffiti, like the beginning of that song, whatever synth they use in the beginning is pretty like sharp in that, I think, 5K region. But then also the vocals from the lead singer and just like that first verse, a bunch of consonants right after the other that I find pretty sibilant on a lot of earphones and a lot of headphones. But a pretty good test, if you throw something like the Mangird Tea at it, it'll actually deal pretty well with that sibilance. And I attribute it to that 5K cut. Neil, the Grateful Dad, it's a cool last name. You're saying you've got a set of teas and you like them very smooth, nothing sticks out but enjoyable. I think that's a fair description. Transient Snail, you prefer tea over coffee. It depends on the time of day for me. I prefer tea in the middle of the day and coffee in the morning. And Sai, you're saying you like your coffee white and creamy, but you'll try some strong coffee if you say they're really good. Yeah, coffee has, if you're drinking bad coffee, throw in a lot of cream. If you're drinking mediocre coffee, a lot of cream. If you're drinking a good coffee, maybe no cream. Patrick's asking, do you think it makes sense to try some different cheaper IEMs first? To try different sound signatures before getting something more expensive? That's a tough question, honestly. That's like, that could be its own video and conversation. It's like, what do you want out of audio? I know when I first got into audio, I thought that I just wanted like one headphone or one earphone, and then I would, be satisfied with that. But it turns out what I was actually really more interested in was the exploration and, hearing people describe a thing that's different from what I've got and be like, I want to know if I hear that. But that's not everybody. Like a lot of people, they're just looking for, I just want something that sounds good. I don't want to be, I'm not trying to turn this into a hobby necessarily. I'm not looking for a monthly expense. Just want a good sounding set that, maybe I can upgrade my DAC, maybe upgrade my amp, and then be solid with it. So if that's the kind of person you are, skip the cheap stuff. Like just stop, like don't waste money on the cheap stuff. Just look for something that's in your price range and maybe stretch your price range a little bit, because I think it can be worth it, and just go for it. But if you're into that exploration, or maybe you're worried that you go into it, like you spend 300 bucks on a Blessing 2, and maybe you're concerned that, ooh, I really wish I had something with more bass. Or, ooh, I wish, people say this doesn't have good treble air. What does good treble air sound like? If you think that you're more like that, maybe it can be worth it to shop around in the cheaper items and just get a sense for what sound signature you like. Because whether or not I would recommend to you the Blessing 2 or the Sennheiser IE300, two very different IEMs at roughly the same price, which one would I recommend to you? I mean, I like the Blessing 2, but I definitely know people that would prefer the Sennheisers. And if you're afraid of that happening to you, okay, it can make sense to spend some time with the cheaper stuff. Or, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough call. That's one of the tough things about audio, is that it's very hard to hear things before you buy them, at least here in the United States, maybe in some other places. I know in some other countries where they've got like shops with IEMs, you can kind of go in there and demo them. That's pretty enviable. Here in the US, we don't have anything like that, or at least I haven't seen anything like that. I guess I'm not really answering your question, am I? I would say if your interest in this hobby is just to get a nice set, spend 300 bucks and get out, I would do that. I would not bother spending, 30, 50 bucks on cheaper stuff and listening to it. Or even if you've got a budget of $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, whatever. If you think that you're fine just taking the advice of people that have heard a lot of stuff, saying, I know I'm gonna get something, I know it's gonna be good, and maybe you're not too picky about the exact sound signature, I think that's fine. But if you're looking for a hobby, I think the exploration for me is what motivates me, the exploration and the discovery and the learning. For someone like me, the dealing with more budget IEMs can be worth it. It can be a fun way to experiment. Alan Orozco saying, DAC dongle for a phone or a DAP sound-wise? And also thanks for recommending the blessing too. Okay, I think purely just for sound, if your only concern is sound quality, I don't think there's a very good argument to get a DAP, to be honest. I don't think there's a good argument for a DAP. I think an Apple, a $9 Apple dongle sounds pretty good. Now, if you need more output power, like if you're listening to headphones, okay, there's a pretty decent argument for a DAP. My personal preference for a DAP is having physical buttons, playback buttons. That matters to me a lot, but if that doesn't matter to you, maybe there's not a good argument. Maybe you're concerned about battery life on your phone, or saving storage, and maybe there's some other arguments for a DAP, but just purely on sound quality, I don't think so. Juan asking, Mangird Tea, teabag mod, when? I haven't tried that out yet. What's up, Juan? Link is asking, how do the T's compare to the C Audio Yume? So tuning, the big tuning difference between the Yumes and the Mangird is that the Yumes are going to have a little bit more presence and forwardness in the vocal region. I think that treble on the Yume is also, it's still pretty polite, but it's not as kind of relaxed as it is on the Mangird T's. And then in the bass region, I think the Mangird T's are a little bit stronger in the mid bass. The C Audio Yume, it's got some sub bass emphasis to it, but can honestly come across almost neutral in the bass, whereas the Mangird Tea comes across a little bit forward in the bass. So that's just kind of like the tuning differences. Now, I think for my personal preference, just pure tuning wise, I would probably go with the C Audio Yume. But when it comes to actually listening enjoyment, I would probably pick the Mangird Tea, because as much as I said the Mangird Tea is a little bit flat and two-dimensional sounding, that's like compared to other stuff at around 300 bucks. I think in the $200 price range, the Mangird Tea does better than some others, and I think it does better than the C Audio Yume. The Yume I just found honestly kind of boring sounding. I like the tone, I like the tonality, the tuning on it's very good, very mature, well refined, but it's just kind of boring and two-dimensional, like a step further two-dimensional than the Mangird. So Calnet, you went from the TFZ budget IEM to 10T3 to Starfield to FH3 and currently FD5. So question for you, Calnet, was that journey, that's how I say that word, was that journey, was it worth it for you? Did you get more from each of those moves? Did you just learn something new about yourself? Do you wish that you had just instead jumped straight to the FD5, or are you happy that you heard all those? I mean, I can say the TFZ is probably going to be, a budget TFZ is probably going to be pretty V-shaped and pretty exciting off the bat, but maybe lacking in mid-range. From there you went to the 10T3, which I think is stronger on mid-range quality. Pretty big step down in terms of bass quantity. So maybe you're let down by that. Starfield seems like a fairly smart next move, maybe a balance between those two. The FH3 a little bit stronger than the dimensionality, but I actually think the FH3, I like that better than the FD5 personally. My Life Matters saying that you can go to CanJam and listen to all kinds of headphones and earphones. They've got a meet in September in Irvine. Interesting. So yeah, for those that aren't aware, there is, I don't know too much about it because I've never been to one, but there's like this series of events called CanJam. I believe they're operated by HeadFi. Don't quote me on that because again, I don't know too much about it, but basically they're events where it seems like they invite various retailers, distributors, as well as manufacturers of audio equipment. They have booths kind of like, I don't know, just like any other trade show. And you can demo and listen to stuff in person, which seems pretty cool. Now, I don't know that that's like a busy convention hall. That seems like a tough place to audition, especially open back headphones, but could be pretty good for IEMs. Omar's asking, I think, an important question. Is it true that with high-res placebo sticker, the sound improves? That's speculation. I will not comment on it. Oh, Neil, interesting. You're saying the T's do come alive at higher listening levels and you find them a bit 2D when low volume. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not totally certain what volume level I typically listen to. I think it's probably moderate. Like, I don't think I listen super quiet, but I definitely don't listen super loud. And Calnut, you're answering my question. You're saying the Starfield was more of a side grade and the FD5 may not be for everyone, so it's best to try it out first. Okay. Recode, will I review the Stardust? I don't think it's worth reviewing. So for those that maybe are not familiar with it, all right, so Moondrop came out with the SSR last year. An earphone I reviewed. I liked it quite a bit. In fact, I ended up buying like 2 more of them for no reason. I liked the cable and then I wanted it in white. But they also released a different version of it called the Stardust, but it was only available on Taobao, which it's all in Chinese. I don't think that they ship to the United States. So I had seen it on Taobao before and I was interested in buying it, but I never was able to. But then just recently, I saw it was on Taobao again. I gave it another shot using, I think, Superbuy as like a proxy purchase. I've never used Superbuy before. I have no idea. I don't know. The whole process is confusing. I hope this IEM at some point shows up on my doorstep, but I just got it because it looks cool. I don't know that it's going to be worth re-reviewing because I expect it'll sound the exact same. If it sounds different, then maybe it'll be worth re-reviewing, but I expect it's going to sound the same. I'll definitely measure it and I'll throw it up on Squiglink. Cool. I think I've caught up with live chat, but I definitely skipped over some stuff earlier. You know, it's 3:30. I mentioned I've got some packages waiting for me at the mailbox. I'm gonna go ahead and go grab those. So really appreciate y'all hanging out and having this conversation, chatting. If you haven't already, you know, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the bell. You've already done that though. And then I'll see you in the next super review, which hopefully will be coming up fairly soon. Thanks again.